Please be seated. Those of you who are at home and looking at your bulletins will see sermon, the Reverend Pat Grote. I am not the Reverend Pat Grote. I'm Alan Christensen, the other deacon. Pat is snowed in Everett, and so David asked me if I'd pinch hit, and I hemmed and hawed a little bit and said, sure, I'll give it a try. I've never preached impromptu like this before, but I'll say a prayer to start. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. And let me grab my notes. The Word became flesh and lived among us. Many of you have seen the movie Forrest Gump, starring Tom Hanks. I recently saw Tom Hanks on a talk show, and he was talking about during the filming of Forrest Gump, the director came to him and said, we've got a problem. This kid that we have to play the young Forrest, we're not going to be able to teach him to talk like you, because they're supposed to be playing the same person. And this is a boy about 8 or 9 years old. He was from very deep in Mississippi and had a thick Mississippi accent. Tom Hanks said, well, let me talk with him. And so what they ended up doing is Tom Hanks had lots of conversations with the kid. He taped these conversations. He said he still has the tapes in a box somewhere. And he learned to talk like this young boy. And it occurred to me that this is a good analogy for the incarnation. The second person of the Trinity, 2,000 years ago, was born of a woman, as Paul reminds us. He had to learn to talk like us, in a very real sense, so that we could learn the language of God and so that we could receive the light and the grace and the truth that God reveals through Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate expression of God, as John reminds us in his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Not all could or would receive this message that he brought us. But to those who did receive him, as John says, he gave the power to become God's children, to share in his kingdom, to, in a very real sense, be brought up into the divine life. We're given so many tools, gifts to assist in this. The scriptures, the sacraments, baptism, Eucharist, fellowship with each other, opportunities to minister to the world around us. And like John the Baptist, we can witness to the light and bring that light and that grace into the world. And that leads to our own transformation and the transformation of the world around us into something more and more resembling God's kingdom. Some of the ways we do this are, little acts of kindness. Letting someone sleep on the, porch of the church who has nowhere else to go. I walked through the snow to get here this morning, and very often at the Safeway, about halfway between my house and the church, there will be somebody standing outside with a sign. Says, homeless, please help, or words to that effect. And hopefully there's nobody out there with a sign for hours today, because the weather outside is frightful. The psalm says God sends his snow like wool, and the snow didn't seem very wool-like. But very often people are outside Safeway, And so on the way here, I stopped in, gave my card to an employee, told her about the shelter, and said, if you see anybody out there today, please let them know, and direct them to the shelter tonight, because we don't want any of God's children to be left out in the cold. But as Jesus learned our language, so as we participate in God's grace more and more, we learn the divine language and we become more and more one with God. Amen.